Nice. Starting right there. All right, Erica, I don't see anyone else coming in from the waiting room, so you can get started whenever you feel good.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Courtney. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Erica Saggart, and I'm the Director of Sector Capacity with the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, and I'll be moderating today's session with the help of Courtney. So on behalf of BCMPHA, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm hosting this session from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and that participants are joining us from communities located across the traditional and unceded lands of many First Nations across British Columbia. BCMPHA is grateful to carry out this work on these lands and remains committed to advancing housing solutions with that respect Indigenous rights, title, and self-determination. As many of you here know, BCMPHA represents and supports nonprofit housing providers across the province. Our members are on the front lines of delivering non-market housing in increasingly complex development, funding, and regulatory environments. Today's webinar is part of BCMPHA's ongoing commitment to share practical tools, innovations, and policy developments that can support members to deliver housing more efficiently and at scale. Across BC, we're all grappling with the same challenge: how to deliver more housing faster and while managing rising costs, capacity constraints, and lengthy approval timelines. In response, we've seen a growing focus on standardization, prefabrication, and digital tools as a way to reduce risk, cost, and uncertainty, particularly for multifamily nonprofit housing projects. And that's really the context for today's conversation. We're very pleased to be joined by colleagues from BC Housing and Iredale Architecture architects who will be presenting on the DASH program. DASH is a province-wide, first in Canada, digital platform designed to help developers, nonprofit housing providers plan and design and deliver multifamily housing more quickly and more cost-effectively. For nonprofit housing providers, the implications are significant: shorter timelines, more predictable outcomes, greater ability to scale delivery, and tools that support early decision-making before significant costs are incurred. So today's session will walk through DASH, what it is, how it works, and how housing providers and other folks can begin to engage with the platform. Before I turn things over, I just want to quickly note that following the presentations and the live demo we have here this morning, we'll have time for questions and discussion. So I encourage you to use, Courtney, are we using the Q&A function? Is that the best, or chat?
Chat.
Just
Yeah.
put it in the chat. Okay. We're nice and casual here this morning. So please put your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to compile it on our end as we go. And at the end, we'll make some room for discussion. So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome Lisa, Esther, and Albert. Thank you so much for being here. I'll hand it over to you folks to get into the interesting content. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Erica. While we bring up the slide deck, so we thought for everyone on the call, we do just a quick overview of what is DASH and its different components. Lisa and I will co-present that, and then we'll turn it over to Albert from Iredale Architecture to actually show you how the platform works itself. We're really excited to have this opportunity to meet with the sector to talk about DASH. DASH is, as you can see it on the screen, is now going to go into presentation mode. Hopefully it all is, oh, no, we're back in presenter mode, Ali. Perfect. Perfect. So I'm Esther DeVos. I'm the Executive Director of Research here at BC Housing, and I am coming to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples and nations, and really feel honored and privileged to be able to live, work, and play on these lands and access the waters. I do cold plunging, so being in the inlet is always a fun time. We're here to talk about DASH, which is the acronym Digitally Accelerated Standardized Housing. Feel free to come up with as many puns on the word DASH as possible. We do it all the time. Today, I introduced the word Dashify to a group of people at BC Housing. Credit to Lisa for that, but people are really having fun with the name. Next slide, please, Ali. So what is DASH? You've probably heard about it. You heard a little bit from Erica as she introduced the session. We are talking about it as a digital platform. So it is a combination of different tools that through one portal you can access that weaves together all of the different pieces for the standardization of designs, the prefab manufacturing, and creating a digital twin using BIM, or building information modeling. And then you can also have your design translated essentially into a kit of parts and a shopping list of all of those offsite manufacturers or prefabricated components that you then need to order. And like Lego blocks, you then assemble your building. The benefit of this is twofold. We're looking at having housing be made more efficient, cost effective, but also bringing everyone together earlier in the planning stage to really make sure that we have a much more seamless approach to building. And so we're really excited about this. Right now, we've been focused on the 3 to 6 wood frame building blueprints. We have one that meets the design guidelines by BC Housing and another one that meets the standards set by the building code. So you're welcome to use either blueprint. We will be adding other blueprints as we go, but right now we've been focusing on the 3 to 6 wood frame because that's the one that is the most prevalent across all of the province. And like I said, at scale, this is going to go faster, more cost effective. We're also envisioning that there will be some economies of scale that can be realized through standardized design as well as the prefab components. Next slide, please. Where did Dash originate, you might ask? This is kind of new. As Erica mentioned, this is a made in Canada solution made right here in BC, originating out of BC Housing with partners, particularly with Metro Vancouver. And it started as a CMHC Housing Challenge project. So we thank CMHC for their support and funding through a number of stages for this project. We have support by the regulators for architects and engineers. And so really excited to be able to partner with everybody who's involved in the housing process. So this isn't just BC Housing and Metro Vancouver. We have industry representation, regulator representation, government representation from the provincial side of things. If you go to the website, you'll be able to see the list of specifically who was involved. And what we really wanted to do was make sure that everyone had their perspective accounted for in the workflow that Dash now supports, so that we could really, really understand where those pressure points were and where there was lots of opportunities to streamline and come together. Next slide, please. The key components, so we have a standardized kit of parts type of architecture. So we talk about standardization. We're not talking about one building that you just put over and over and over again. These are standardized components. So if you think about how Lego blocks work, you have a standard 2-dot Lego block, thin and fat. You've got a 4-block, 6-block. That's what we're talking about in terms of a kit of parts that you put together and design your building. So you still have quite a lot of flexibility, especially for the 3 to 6 story ones. We're talking architects still being involved with part 3 of the code to be able to really realize your own design and make sure that the aesthetic meets the local needs of that neighborhood and of that municipality and community. We then also move into design for assembly. And so we are bringing in BIM into the coordination, not only at the design and development stage, but also that you'd be able to create that digital twin to then, and this is where I see it as a really big plus for nonprofit operators, to be able to use for your maintenance planning as well after you have occupancy, because you will essentially know where everything is in your building, what was used to create the building, and know where you need to intervene or interject as the building goes through its life cycle. This is all open access, open source, and so the design and blueprints are there for you to use, as are the tools. There is no cost to you as an organization, and we really want people to use it. Next slide, please. So looking at a construction workflow, what we are seeing and proposing with the Dash platform is that it streamlines approval. So the standardized components are permit ready. They have been designed in thought process of what is in the building code, but then also what is possible at the pre-manufacturing side of things. So you can do much more rapid prototyping, understand what your building is going to look like. Also on the tool, when you choose your plot of land, you'll be able to see the different configurations based on the number of units and floor plans that you want, to see what fits on that parcel of land and how you might even be able to optimize it for other considerations of density and things like that. But depending on the municipality, we will have all of the information of the rules. And so there's a rules-based generator that will help inform that you need so much setbacks, or you need to take into account of a certain caveat or walking path or something like that. And that will inform the overall design and the prototype that you come up with. And then as you go through your permitting approvals and move towards construction, you can then move your design through the kit of parts for standardization. The BIM helps you do that. And then you go to the marketplace that is online and be able to access the manufacturers who are able to deliver those components. Right now, we're working predominantly with panelized prefabrication manufacturers, but that doesn't necessarily leave out volumetric as well. And so that will be also forthcoming. Next slide, please. I think, so really we're talking about end-to-end from the beginning to the end. It is a bit of a workflow, but that's doesn't mean that you have to do the whole workflow. So if you choose to just do the design part, or if you have a design already in mind and you want to upload it and be able to see how it would fit on your parcel of land, you can do that as well. You can also take your existing design and upload it and then be able to use the kit of parts and move through the construction and the BIM phase, and having that BIM instruction, that digital twin, helping for your ongoing asset management. Next slide, please. The Dash toolkit, as I mentioned, you've got Dash blueprints. Right now, they're just for 3 to 6 story wood frame. We are looking at eventually doing more mass timber, 7 to 12, single egress blueprints, on and on. It allows you in real time to configure your building based on the suite sizes you want, the sort of size of number of bedrooms, how you want to configure it. You can play around with all of that in situ on this platform. And then it goes onto the rules-based generative form, and you get an idea of, based on what you want your building to contain in terms of number of units and size of units, what the building footprint could look like, given all of the rules for zoning in that area. And at some point we will be adding also the utilities regulation layer. And so you'll also have those rules informing your design as well. Next slide. Then you've got your essentially your box of what you want to have as your building. That then goes through the BIM process. It's still pretty light BIM touch. It's not the full BIM as has been used in commercial development yet, but it allows you to then digitize your design and be able to move it through Cope's Kit of Parts engine, which is part of the Dash platform and workflow that optimizes the design and essentially creates that shopping list of what you need from a prefab or offsite manufacturer. And then you go to that virtual marketplace and you find out who can supply that for you and in your area, or with what costs. And you go from there and you make arrangements for those supplies to be put on your site and start building your building. I will at this point turn it over to my colleague Lisa to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Esther. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Helps, and I am the Executive Lead of Project Acceleration at BC Housing, co-leading the Dash initiative with Esther. So I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the things that Esther has shared at a high level, and then we're going to hand it over to Albert to take you through a real-time demonstration of how this actually works. A couple of things I want to stress before I dive into the remainder of the slides here is that we haven't actually built any buildings with Dash yet. So this is it's a prototype. It's what in the kind of innovation space or tech space, we call it a minimum viable product. BC Housing is undertaking 4 Dash demonstration projects on PRHC-owned land, which is land owned by BC Housing. So we are going to test this, but it's there for your testing as well. The standardized designs are there. You can hand them to your architects and give them your sites and say, try this out. And one of the benefits of Dash from a development point of view is there's a substantial savings in project development funding required. It doesn't mean less work for architects. It just means they'll be able to do more work on more projects. But from a project by project point of view, and maybe Albert can talk a little bit about this in terms of soft costs that can be saved by using Dash. So you're a nonprofit, you've got your site, you're going to develop it or redevelop it. You go to the acceleratedhousing.ca, and I put our website in the chat. If you're in the Lower Mainland right now, all of the zoning data is actually already uploaded. If you're not, if you're in another part of the province, you can put the zoning specifications into the rules-based generator. You put your site in, you select your site on the map, and then you take the standardized design and put it on the site. And as Albert will show you, what would usually take an architect maybe 2 to 3 weeks to configure spits out in about 3 to 4 minutes a building configuration. This is the rapid prototyping stage. And if it spits out a building that has all 1 bedrooms and you don't like it, you can adjust and say, I need more 3 or 4 bedrooms. So it's an interactive tool that helps to generate a concept for your site very, very quickly. Next slide. And we know that nonprofits as well as BC Housing don't want to build all 1 bedrooms, and the kits of parts systems can be stacked to create 1 bedroom units, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms. So you have these kits of parts that can be used to specifically design what you need for your building, for your client group, for the people that you need to serve. And so there are multiple bedroom options and other design options that can then be created into the building, and then created into units. So the kits of parts are created into units, and then overall you've got a building. And Albert will talk more about this. The whole point of Dash is to optimize everything for prefabrication. So to have a really easily constructible, coherent building. And the digital tools that we've assembled on the Dash platform, their job is to help you and your professionals that you're working with to do this. Next slide. Somebody asked in the Q&A or the chat, where can I go find these kits of parts? They are on the website when you go into the standardized design. But here are some examples of the kits of parts systems that Dash has created. There's roof and floor panels, interior external wall panels, balconies. So all of the things that generally make up a building site or a building have been turned into these kits of parts that can be co-assembled into units and into buildings, and they all fit together. And one thing I'll say here, this is from a risk mitigation point of view. If you're one of the challenges with volumetric modular, and we are going to be working on a volumetric modular design, but if you're working with a manufacturer and they go out of business, you're kind of stuck because you were ordering modules from a proprietary company that builds a certain kind of module. The Dash kits of part systems, and we're really insistent on this, can be built by any of the manufacturers in BC that we're working with, so that they're interchangeable. You could, in theory, although it wouldn't make sense from an economy of scale point of view, you could get your roof and floor panels from one manufacturer and your balconies from another manufacturer, and if they're all using the Dash kits of part systems, they all fit together. They're interoperable. Next slide. I've talked about this already. These are some of the things that are in the kits of parts. More to come. We're currently working on a prototype for a wet wall system, so bathroom cassette that can be dropped in with the plumbing already in place. Again, we're just at the beginning, but we want to do as much mechanical and electrical standardization as well as the current kits of parts and structural. Next slide. Esther talked a little bit about this. I would, if we were didn't have a screen up, I'd ask for a show of hands, and maybe we can do this after. How many people on this call, and there's no right or wrong answer, are familiar with building information modeling? Is it something you're already using? Because that is. And you may not be, but the architects you're working with, are they using BIM? So building information modeling basically creates a digital twin of your building. There are some high-level specs for very detailed specs rather for how to use BIM on our website. We've got a BIM for Dash. So if you are thinking of using BIM for Dash for one of your projects, you're at the beginning stage, you're engaging an architect, they can go to the acceleratedhousing.ca. They can download the BIM requirements for Dash. It's about a 20 or 30 page guide. And so if your professionals are overwhelmed by what to do with BIM for residential, we've tried to lay out everything really closely and carefully. The advantage of BIM is basically you get a lockdown model of your building by the time you start the offsite manufacturing, and BIM has a substantial capacity to reduce expensive change orders. We know on every construction project there are many change orders. The part of the problem that Dash is trying to solve from a constructability point of view, not just on the acceleration side, but how can we build buildings more efficiently, more effectively, and more cost effectively, and eliminating or reducing change orders is one of the advantages of Dash and BIM. Let's go to the next slide. I think we've already touched on this enough times, but the whole point is to optimize the designs for prefabrication so that they can be made in BC factories. There was a question in the chat that Albert already answered. The standardized designs allow for a variation depending on the seismic zone, the climatic zone. So if you're in the north, you're going to have different requirements for snow load, etc. So the designs can be adjusted to meet your conditions, and then obviously the manufacturers will build whatever the BIM model tells them to. Next slide. Quickly here, I realize we're taking up more time than we wanted to on the presentation. From a zoning point of view, and we're working with a number of local governments, the picture on the left is not a dashable building by any stretch of the imagination. The picture on the right is a dashable building. So we're trying to get away from this wedding cake style to more of a cohesive design that's easier to prefabricate. I don't love this drawing because it makes it look like we're just building boxes. If you look at there's a slide that we've already touched on, maybe the Vienna House slide, or maybe it's coming next, that shows that you can build beautiful buildings using Dash, but they do need to be rationalized for constructability and cost effectiveness. Next slide. Here it is, Vienna House. So this is a Dash prototype. So this building was what inspired the Dash program. It's in Vancouver, and it's a beautiful building. So we're not saying exchange anything for beauty, but the standardized design framework does allow architects still to have quite a bit of expression. It automates routine tasks, but allows for a creative focus on beautiful buildings. I'd like to stop there. I don't know if that's the last slide or not, but I'd like to, with that, hand it over to our wonderful Albert, who's been here from the beginning creating these blueprints and is going to do a demonstration for all of you.
Thank you very much. That was a great introduction to Dash. And then I want to get into the nuts and bolts a little bit to give everyone here an idea of kind of how Dash is used on a typical project. If you guys can bear with me for a second as I share my screen. Okay, so sorry, 1 second. We seem to have lost. Sorry, 1 quick second. I seem to. Oh, perfect. There you go. All right, just a quick check. Does everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So again, thank you for everyone's time today. I'm just going to get into the nuts and bolts of Dash, and I'm actually going to go through the website as it's a really good front door into the tools. As we're building out the platform, this website would give a lot of the updates, and it kind of captures a lot of the important parts, but it's also a place where the tools and support is located. So again, as we're building this out, this is a good place to start. As you kind of go through the introduction and a bit of discussion, the first two really important resources is the introduction and the how-to guide. The intro is basically a summarized version of some of the high-level important things to know about Dash. But for the purpose of today's demo, I do want to go through kind of these overarching phases of your project: planning, design, construction, to touch on those elements. A quick way to describe kind of what those elements are is in the how-to guide. A big part of a Dash project is kind of understanding the site and what you need on your project. So in the how-to guide, we talk a little bit about the framework recipe, and right up front is kind of the prerequisites. So this includes things like site and site characteristics. So you'll see that we discuss things like the BIM program, the Dash program specifically, but also things like the site slope and drainage, a little bit about constructability, sites class, logistics of prefab, and of course, equally important are other prerequisites such as your program, if there are specific requirements for tenants, or if you have specific needs for the site and building. So these kind of set the stage for Dash. Now, it's important that when you look at these characteristics of the site, we're not saying that this is exactly what you need for Dash, nor are we saying that you can't do Dash if any of these are not applicable to you. Quite the opposite. We're finding that there are cases where a developer would use partial Dash where it applies, or their site may need site-specific designs and then have elements of Dash. So it's really important to kind of think about this with your particular site and project. The next part of the recipe is almost like a step-by-step. Now, this particular workflow, I'll get into a little bit more details, but in essence, it's how you go through your project with the Dash kit in mind, and how to plan out your workflow to get the most out of it. So you'll see a lot of this is having to do with optioning at the beginning when you're perhaps looking at your site and what you can do on the site. But it does get into kind of getting to the design parts of figuring out what works on the site. So a good way to think about this is the Dash kit, as you saw on the slideshow, is that it allows particular forms, a bar building, a C, or an L, up to what is the kind of constraints of the current Dash 1.0 design, which is a 4 to 6 story light wood frame a building with some elements of mass timber as required. It's limited to about 18 meters, sprinklered, and so on and so forth. So these are kind of your constraints for Dash 1.0. Together with kind of the site, your building requirements, this is where you get into the really fun stuff. So the core of Dash is not to say that this building that you see in this cover is exactly what you need. Think of this as a start point, a conceptual framework for kind of more design and kind of a way to get through some of the important design and regulatory considerations as a framework for your architect or yourselves coming up with some really nice designs. Now, in terms of the workflow, going back to this one, the pre-project setup and optioning, this is where I think Esther and Lisa talked a lot about how are we trying to make sure that when you start considering Dash, that it actually provides a lot of the upfront work. Now, what we mean by that and what the secret sauce of Dash is that we've actually gone out and worked with authorities having jurisdiction, fellow architects and engineers, construction managers and general contractors, and prefabbers to begin looking at how our designs at Dash 1.0 is pre-coordinated or pre-developed to kind of align with everyone. It sounds really crazy until I kind of show you a little bit about it. So one really good example of this is this kit of parts that is available on the website. Shows you kind of those basic elements, the Lego blocks, right? You'll see that many of our units are actually these pre-configured blocks where you can see the sub elements or other Lego pieces can kind of connect in, and all together they kind of make these buildings. Now, an important part of this example is that it's not just simply a BIM model of a building design. So if we go back to the website, after kind of viewing the BIM template, you'll see that we have these pre-coordinations with government regulatory guidelines. So what that actually means is if you look at and our partners, SVN Architects, had created is, in essence, model zoning regulations that are coordinated with DASH to allow and facilitate downstream work for prefabrication. So when we talk about designing for manufacturing and assembly, DFMA, we're not just talking about the technical aspects. With DASH, we are actually talking about planning as well. And you'll see that there's been a number of these municipalities that have kind of been engaged and have been working through this, kind of making that shift from this building to something that's a little bit more prefabable. Now, a really important aspect of this, going back to the template that we saw, was the idea that these model planning or zoning regulations is that it's completely aligned with the Revit model in a way that when BIM is used, we're also making sure that it aligns with planning regulations. So that's kind of where the next tool, if you kind of go back to the website here, the site assessment tool, this is ArchiStar. This is where we work with ArchiStar to as a proof of concept to show that generative tools can help with this aspect. So with the planning aspect. So this particular example, and I'm sorry I had to do this because sometimes it takes a little while to generate. But in essence, if you have the site, you have your program requirements, which you can enter into ArchiStar, things like unit mixes, number of units, number of stories, you can actually ask it to generate a site. So I've done this simple one for us just for today. Once I can move it, it's a little bit stally when I'm presenting. Sorry? Oops, I think somebody had a question, but I'm not sure. You can see that based on the planning rules that we had that we saw from Metro Vancouver and SVN, you can actually ask it to generate a number of solutions. Now, to I think Lisa's point, it doesn't always generate the one you want. But in this particular example, perhaps we really like this linear building. It's much more practical as a single building, elevators, building form. This is the power of kind of that pre-coordination as it aligns with digital tools, right? Within the tools itself, you can kind of have those pre-designs ready in a way that you will also comply with planning. But the extension of this is that the template itself, if I can switch back, is that it isn't just simply blocks that allow for compliance with, let's say, the planning tools, but it also is much more detailed than that. You'll see that the planning, the blocks are not just planned, they're actual true elements in BIM. So they have everything from doors and kitchens and such. So that's kind of the next step. As we do these rapid prototypes and we start understanding, okay, our preferred building, let's say it's that bar building, works with the zoning, we are already populating a detailed enough model that at an early phase, we can start doing things like Class Ds. We can start, okay, does this work for us? Does the program work for us in this particular building form? Does the site layouts work? Do we need any additional considerations? For example, Dash comes with options for parking, one level of below grade parking. It may also include a ground floor podium to deal with things like a different use on the ground floor, or as often the case, a sloping site. These are all where you can make those decisions very early, because through the use of BIM, you can get a much finer resolution much earlier to review and make informed decisions, right? Getting information to you at the right time to make informed decisions about whether a project is feasible or whether changes are required. Doing so early is a big part of making sure that a project goes smoothly later on. I can go into a bit more detail about this, but the essence of this building of a BIM twin is that it allows you to do a lot of this work. So I think beyond coming up with a design that is beginning to look like a building, you can actually get out a lot of information. Unfortunately, I don't have the Revit model up because it does require me to switch screens. But while we are doing this, it also populates schedules within the BIM program that allows you to do quick takeoffs and class Ds a lot more effectively. So when we model these items, for example, this kitchen, it will actually count the number of plumbing fixtures in total in your development. All these things is designed to allow you to understand if a project is feasible early. It allows you to talk with your project team to understand the technical items. And it allows you to talk with the AHJ much earlier than some of the more custom designs that requires a lot more work. So if we quickly switch to the website, you're going to see a lot about the prefabrication planning tools. Now, part of these BIM models that are very much populated is it comes at a resolution where your project teams can begin to look at the other kits. So some of the chat had described things like structure. I think Lisa and Esther had brought up mechanical and electrical. So what we are currently building out is a structural kit that allows these buildings, and they are, it's kind of hinted at here, but you can actually lay out the structure of the buildings at this early phase, so that once you are at a stage where you have floor plans, if I can go to these, I think we have one here. Okay, maybe that was not such a good idea. I apologize. When we have these floor plans, they are already ready to consider the structural, mechanical, and electrical coordination. So in addition to the we're building out right now, is we're actually working with BC Hydro can also consider site connections and kind of the BC Hydro workflow with design and kind of their work with municipalities, as well as planning the sequence of construction to make sure that when they start to design and they get into the nuts and bolts, they are already aware of the building, because these buildings are resolved early. They can actually start looking at what they need to design and what they need to do. These resolved buildings at this point, probably at about schematic design, we are already able to do a very detailed look at its constructability and its elements. So one of the other proof of concept tools that we've been using is COPE. So this model at this point, likely quite early on in schematic design, can actually be exported and imported into COPE in a way that you can actually assess a building's prefabability, ability to be prefabricated. So you'll see that we've uploaded a similar model with some slight tweaks, and these elements are all live. So you can see that the model that we had starting in BIM that had gone through a process to assess if it's feasible on that site and has gone through that technical review. We've discussed a bit of the site connections and whether those are doable and how to be able to interact with the AHJ and BC Hydro. But a really interesting part is we can even look at the constructability aspects, where through COPE's generative tools, we can, or sorry, rules-based tools, we can get an assessment of the number of panels, the amount of materials. There are some characteristics that are based on cost and let's say carbon accounting, but a lot of this is supposed to be usable and tied into the COPE. Oops, sorry. Where's the marketplace? I'm sorry. I am sorry. it's tied into the marketplace. And this is where those early collaborators have been kind of onboarded into COPE in a way that this model should be usable by them to assess the form of the building and whether they can prefab and start giving you some high level information about its the hard costs on the prefab elements. This goes a little bit further than simply with this model being broken up into panels and elements in a way that you can get that information up front. But what's really interesting is that because we actually work with these prefab suppliers on how they like to prefab or panelize in this particular, at a point where this model, not only is it useful from the beginning at conceptual stage, but our work with these prefabbers into their workflow. So many fabricators in BC, they have their own software for the purpose of breaking up a building into prefabable elements. So the idea of collaborating with them on BIM is such that we can eliminate a lot of the inefficiencies that we see today. So these BIM models, the building form, the L's and the C's, and how the elements come together is specifically designed in coordination with prefab so that it works not only in their workflow in fabrication, but also in the digital space. See a lot of prefabbers needing to rebuild models because the models were not built for fabrication, or in some cases doing it in really short notice, and that creates a lot of possibilities for errors. So the idea of these pre-coordination upfront with BIM is to allow the workflow to work smoothly. So in other words, at this point, you may get a really good idea of the solution for prefabrication, but being able to share it with those manufacturers allows sharing it with this particular BIM model, sharing it with your prefabbers will also kind of couple in with their workflow. And so you'll see a lot of the manufacturers, the hope is that they worked with us on this so that they can actually be able to deliver a better product and be able to work more closely with the design team to eliminate some of those challenges. So in terms of kind of these elements about how to get from a BIM model through planning, through site assessment, through prefabrication, is to really get to the point where you can probably get to, I'm going to say about tender or about construction start 30 to 50% faster. That's our goal, right? And it's through these coordination and collaboration up front to try to get a workable building on the site earlier. Now, it's really important to understand that we don't think every building is going to be a Dash building. This is a very specific typology that may be for a specific need. But the hope is that this would really help get more buildings in the ground. It would help architects and engineers like ourselves be able to do more of these buildings, because a lot of the upfront work is kind of pre-coordinated and it's kind of pre-set up. Ultimately, the BIM model is where we do a lot of that work. So in order to kind of facilitate that process using digital tools, Aliova has actually created a skeleton for these BIM requirements that are specific for this DFMA process. Again, how to bring a workable design through planning all the way to fabrication and construction. We've actually created this framework to allow you and your teams to kind of get a head start. Where you may have to do some variation is perhaps if your building is not full BIM. So that's kind of that discussion about those prerequisites or characteristics of the site. But this is actually a really good start point. I do want to bring up that while we talk about BIM, I think the general attitude towards BIM right now is that the expectation is you're going to get a BIM model that's for a hospital or for a very complex commercial building. So I think a lot of what we try to do here is right-size BIM for residential buildings. So going back to our template model, a lot of these items are exactly what you need to know to do a residential building, right? So kitchens, HVAC, bathrooms. So the idea of these BIM requirements is to set up the framework for Dash to only model what's needed and for your team to only do what is necessary for BIM and for other purposes. But to save time on that, we've tried to do as much of that pre-work to set you up for success. Now, in terms of all of this, whether it be the digital models through to COPE, to kind of the BIM requirements and all the other things, I just wanted to make it clear that the idea of this is that these models are a great framework for that coordination. And so it's one of the good examples of how far we can get using this digital process is we're actually doing a mini version of the BIM execution for Dash for prototype bathrooms. So in essence, we took one of our standardized bathrooms, let's say this one, and we've actually worked with a general contractor where our BIM model was the framework for a construction model as well as fabrication models. In fact, we have several fabrication models. So this is kind of a mini version, right? If you standardize upfront and you use these kit of parts like Lego blocks, you can put together a building that for the purpose of a project is largely coordinated in a way that allows you to focus on the, let's say, the site-specific design elements or good design, rather than some of these important but time-consuming things. So putting the building together through BIM is not just a 3D model. It's to work with your HJs. It's to work with your engineering team, for example, in my case as an architect, and to make sure that your fabricators are kind of already aware of what your building looks like and to have a start point to get into really detailed design. Now, this is all great. I'm hoping everybody is jazzed about this and understand where we're trying to go with Dash. We're trying to get lots of buildings in the ground, but I do want to highlight that BC Housing has done a lot of groundwork. And if you want to see a real world version of what we're trying to accomplish with Dash, we do have this wonderful website that gives you a lot more information about Vienna House. I suggest you look at this. This is really well documented. Last but not least, as we're building this out, you definitely have us as resources. So you can see the founding team. We all touch on different aspects of Dash. So we're always available to help however we can. And whatever questions you have, I'm hoping we can not just answer today, but be available for the future. Last but not least, there's just some additional information from CMHC, which is who started grant funding for BC Housing, and to show everybody that we have won a bit of an award for some of our early work with BIM and Digital Accelerated Standardized Housing. That's my way to sell our team a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to switch back to Zoom and stop sharing.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Albert. Is there anything else we want to add from the presenter side of things, or are we happy to jump into the Q&A at this point? Lisa or Esther, anything that came up for you there?
No, I think we've got some really good questions. We've been trying to answer some of them as they've been coming up, and some really good feedback from some people who've gone in and played around with it already. So happy to answer the questions. And if we run out of time, I know Courtney has indicated that she's taken all of these noted down. We also have a Dash email address that we'll put in the chat, and you are welcome to email that Dash email, and we'll get back to you on any questions. Thanks, Lisa, that you may have as well.
Great, thanks, Esther. Anything from you, Lisa? I can see there's a handful of technical questions that are kind of peppered throughout that we maybe didn't get answered, but I'm wondering if maybe while we have time to two different things, if anyone has a longer question that they'd like to speak to, feel free to unmute yourself. You can raise your hand and we're happy to take questions that way and we can have a bit of a discussion. I think I saw kind of two broader questions as opposed to just really digging into those technical details. One of them is maybe elaborating a little bit on that overlap with CMHC, Build Canada Homes, like what that federal provincial overlap looks like. Might be good to hear a little bit of elaboration on that component. And then I also think Joe your question around kind of what the expectations are from a nonprofit housing provider side when it comes to capacity to participate, what it looks like using these tools. If there's anything else you want to say on that front, that might be an interesting point for discussion. So I'll hand it back over to you. Anything on that kind of federal piece that might be useful for folks here in the audience to know. And if you do have a question, just a reminder, please raise your hand and I'm happy to take actual questions too.
Sure, I can speak to those two things quickly. And then there's two questions that I actually don't know the answers to that I'd love to hear about the multiple manufacturers HVAC, and then this idea of having kind of a dash light so that nonprofit providers without engaging an architect can start to do just some preliminary modeling. So maybe Albert could speak to both of those. But yeah, in terms of Build Canada Homes, they are looking for buildings built using modern methods of construction. So if you are applying for funding through Build Canada Homes directly, and obviously if you're building is designed already, you don't want to go back necessarily and do a redesign, but you may want to check using the Dash kit of parts system. Can my building that I've designed be manufactured in a BC factory? So that's a really powerful way to use the tools for already designed buildings. But Build Canada Homes has made it very clear, and we've had conversations with them at a BC housing portfolio basis that they are looking for modern methods of construction. So Dash is that. Dash offers that, and as you know, we kind of set it up knowing that something like this might be coming because the federal government had been making these signals. And so now there's a tool for our BC nonprofits to use. So that's on that. And then the question about that big question about what capacity, how do we do this? This is really transformational change. And so at BC Housing, we're looking at this as kind of a 5-year horizon to shift the way we build and eventually shift the way we fund as and when possible to have prefabrication and dash buildings. So it means that at BC Housing, we need to change how we design, how we procure, how we do just about everything, which is, for a nonprofit that has a portfolio of projects, you're in the same boat as us. This is going to be transformational change. So some advice is when you're procuring architects, when you're procuring your trades folks, send them to Dash, get them familiar with it. Ask your architects, and you might even want to write this into your architect RFPs. And we can actually help with some language for this to get, they need to have BIM. You want to have architects who know building information modeling, and probably Albert can speak to it. There's, varied adoption across the sector. And actually that's probably a takeaway. I'll write that down as an action item for me to get our procurement folks to maybe put on the website, how to procure an architect that has BIM capacity. So those, we can provide you with some tools, but to Joe's question, it's a big, hairy, transformational 5-year, oh, and the other thing I said in the chat, which I'll reemphasize, is this isn't something you can bite off all at once. BC Housing builds thousands of homes every year and funds thousands of homes every year, and we're starting with 4 demonstration projects. So start small, pick a project or a site and try Dash out. And even if you don't end up building with Dash, run through a Dash scenario and see what might be possible. So those are some tips and some answers. Thanks, Erica. Back to you.
Thanks. And I'm just resurfacing a couple of the more technical ones, Albert, if you want to respond to either of those. Yeah, great. So thank you for that additional clarification, Lisa. Any other questions that folks want to speak to directly? I'm seeing more kind of come through the chat there. Please feel free to jump in. I feel like there's a lot of those little technical pieces, so I'm not sure what the best way is to answer them. If you want to just speak to them, Albert, that might be easier.
Yeah, I was actually trying to get back to find the beginning, but I think the last one I saw was, Charlotte, you were talking about, does this get you to a Class D estimate or a higher, B or C? That is actually a really good question. So from where we stand at Schematic, we do have a much more detailed model to price, but I would say reliably it would be a Class D at that phase, primarily because we've left room for adjustment. And what I mean by that is that the actual BIM model has some flex. So you could, for example, make some units a little bit thinner, or maybe pull the depth back a little. They're designed in such a way that it allows for that. So there may be some changes that happen based on your specific project. So it would still be a case that it would be a Class D that happens to be well informed. But later on, those same schedules and the BIM model itself would be great for more detailed class estimates. And I might as well just go right to Janet. Given mortgage financing for these projects are likely to come through CMHC, do the designs take into account designs for accessible units? I love that question because CMHC was a integral part of those early designs. The answer is yes, they are. And this has to do with the, for example, the CSA standards. Forgive me, I think 651 or one of the others. So we talked a lot about how those get integrated design, but between CMHC, BC Housing, and Metro Vancouver, the layouts we have today are workable, even under CMHC's requirements. But it's important to understand that even CMHC has been thinking about, for example, the requirements for queen size beds in an accessible bedroom and the massive size of which results from it. They're well aware that there are those particular conditions. And so it's a longer conversation. But the short answer is right now, they do work with CMHC. The other ones I wanted to flag for you that are a little bit challenging is the parkade. I think many of you are aware of the change for accessible vans or accessible mobility vehicles, which is a really good idea, but it can have an impact on your project's feasibility because it does require, how do you say it, higher ceilings. Those are the two examples that I can think of off the top of my head. The Build Canada Homes Funding, I think, Lisa, you gave a really good answer to that. I'm just looking for the more technical stuff, but if I catch anything that anybody wants to add on, please feel free. Sorry, okay, so Steph, sorry, I think I missed this. Could a traditionally designed building be combined with Dash, say a residential building in Dash with a community hall attached? Yes, absolutely. So a big part of Dash was we do have some, I'm going to say optional elements, and we talked about the parkade as well as the concrete podium. But what's really important about Dash is it is fundamentally a prefab kit of parts. So a prefab kit of parts can be combined with other construction, I'm going to say formats. But ideally for Dash, you want to take advantage of, let's say, lightwood frame and mass timber, because in terms of prefab and kind of that sequencing and constructability, it's ideal. But having said that, there are cases where people are looking at Dash partial for their particular building. Shivra, I feel like there's a, I feel like this is a planted answer or a question. In terms of Revit, however, for a nonprofit organization, it would be incredibly helpful to have this kit or parts or Lego block system available in more accessible software platforms Revit knowledge could easily use. This would allow users with no Revit experience to assemble the kit or parts themselves and test different concepts without an architect at the early stage. So I'm going to answer this as a two-part question. The first is, can we use a program that is a little bit more accessible? So the Autodesk gods are going to hate me for saying this, but I really do think that's the way to go. Now, right now, the reason why we've been working in Revit is the idea that Revit as a BIM product is where we hard code the coordination that we've worked so hard with AXJs, other designers, builders. Ideally, and this now I'm going to anger all the architects, ideally the developer should be able to do a lot of that front-end conceptual work without an architect. So how do you know as a developer that your program and your unit mix makes sense? Is you go through this process, whether it's with Revit or a bubble diagram on a piece of paper, it works both ways. So I think in the past, during the early days of Dash when we were designing, we did actually literally have 2D cutouts on a paper, on a table, where we could quickly assemble plans, and once everybody was happy, we could move that into Revit. Now, if there is a digital tool which would allow us to maybe this is the best way to say it, allow anybody to kind of play around with the 3D assets, and then that could be used in Revit, where either your own organic Revit operator can assemble the Dash building in Revit, or you have a an architect later on do that for you, that would be really great, because that again fits in with that workflow where the BIM is your key tool for coordinating not just design, but all the way downstream, right? That's the ideal situation. Now, in terms of tools, I'm sorry to say Revit, but we are actually working with a team that is using other programs. And I want to make it clear that the hope is that it's BIM agnostic, right? BIM program is not necessarily Revit, though Revit is the most common. So that's the other side of the question, is how does this digital workflow end up working in a way that everyone can participate equally? I think that's a really important question.
I'm just going to jump in, Albert, because I'm aware of the time. And so I know some folks are likely have to go. And this is absolutely fascinating. And I think we could all dig into the questions for a while longer. I just want to say thank you so much to Albert, Esther, and Lisa for taking the time to share this morning. I know that was really fascinating. And we do have plans to be cross-posting the recording of this webinar. So folks, if there's any little pieces that you missed, you'll be able to see it and share it with your colleagues. I also know we'll pull the chat. So we'll look through just to make sure if there's any of those questions and if there's any follow-up that needs to happen. I know there was an email posted as well for folks who have other questions. Thank you again. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you all for joining us. And please enjoy the rest of your day. Hope we'll see you all soon.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, folks.